Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi here on this Wednesday. I was a little fried last night, so I didn't do the live stream, which was a good thing because my mind wasn't there. Plus, we got to look at all the overnight models after they came in and decided to make things even more mind-frying as we go forward. But there's a lot going on in the upper atmosphere and will be going on in the upper atmosphere right through the weekend and into next week that's going to make forecasting Jose just a little bit more complicated, or actually probably a lot more complicated than forecasters would like. You know, you like these things to be relatively simple. They seldom are. Sometimes you do get them where you know right away that they're going out and never going to be a problem. But this one, I think, is going to be hair graying, hair pulling, and a bunch of other things. And we're going to be going back and forth on all sorts of emotional roller coasters with regards to the weather models, where the weather models are concerned. This is the 12Z suite of hurricane models. Actually, these are the 6Z model runs from earlier this morning, and then they get posted after 8 a.m. And they have all shifted decidedly to the west from the prior run, and a number of them are clustered, you know, somewhere halfway between Cape Hatteras. Here's 70 west, so right here, and most of them are to the left of 70 and to the right of 73. So they're kind of clustered in there, and I think what we're going to wind up seeing is at least an initial pass of Hurricane Jose, not that far offshore, and might get a little hairy for a while, but we'll see. And with respect to the satellite loop this morning, you can notice that when we go to the visible, right over here in the northwest corner, that's where the actual circulation center of this is. It's tucked in under the northern band of convection. It's still moving to the southeast or south-southeast. Looks like that center is going to soon be down at 25 north, or maybe even a little bit below it, and then it's going to start to turn more toward the west as it's doing this clockwise loop out there. Now, let's look. I'm going to do the long range. Since it was pretty complicated, I'm going to run that now, and then when we come back at the end, when we come back, we'll talk about some other things, including the new NAM model and a few anything else that I can find in the meantime. So stand by as we take a look at the upper air analysis for Hurricane Jose. We're going to take a look at the upper air jet stream pattern going forward, because it is getting decidedly complicated with respect to Jose. And I think we're going to be really pulling our hair out of our head over the next several days with this. But there's nothing here at the moment that says there's anything, anything sort of imminent. But there's just a lot going on, and I figured it would just be better to do it from this angle, so we can take a look at the whole structure of what's actually happening with the jet stream, because it is really complex. So here we have, out in the west, we have a trough. Okay, we also have the remnant trough of Irma. Then this is for this evening. This is for Thursday evening, by the way, so it's close enough to reality. And this is going to be the remnant trough Thursday evening. You have the ridge. Sorry about that. Let me just draw that back in. So the trough in the west, the remnant trough here. You have the jet stream flow in Canada that's pulled up to the north. Okay. And of course, you have Irma, which is Jose, which is sitting. They're starting to look the same here. You have Jose, which is right here, and you can see that nose. It actually looks like a nose. This is the upper high that's cradling Jose around it. And what it is doing also is that it is keeping Jose from interacting with the troughing that is along the east coast. Because if that ridge were weak, Jose would go right through it, get caught in that southwest flow, and move northeastward and goodbye, and would never be heard from again. So this is what we're starting with with regards to the upper air pattern. And now I'm going to just change regions, and we're going to go to this North Atlantic view of the upper air, because you'll see that ridge even better, even though we won't be able to see much further north than Virginia. But it's right out here. Here's that upper high that just kind of noses in, and Jose is here, and your southwest flow is well to the north. So it can't really move out unless the ridge were, there's a weakness in here someplace where it could kind of punch through and move northward. That was what the models were sort of saying over the last couple of days, that eventually a weakness does develop, and that it punches through and gets caught in that trough. So let's take a look and see what the GFS does now as we move forward in time. And there is a bit of a weakness there, and you can see how it opens up. Now, this is for Saturday afternoon, where we have the ridge basically splitting. So you have the upper high, one side of the upper high. Here's another upper high to the west in the Gulf of Mexico, and Jose manages to punch a hole through that ridge, or at least that part of the ridge is weak enough where Jose opens up a little alleyway for it to move through. So how does that look with respect to the entire upper air pattern? So let's widen it out a little bit. We'll go to the North Atlantic view, because I think this is going to show it pretty well. So here we have it on the North Atlantic view, and here's your ridge out in the Gulf of Mexico. Here's your ridge that's out in the Atlantic. That was originally just one, nose that came all the way across, and Jose is now sort of split through it. That trough in the northeast is weaker than what the models had indicated just yesterday and before. There's barely a remnant trough there. And overall in the east, you have a big upper ridge that's building. Okay, so that complicates this even more because of the fact that you're basically going to go into a pattern where it's ridges everywhere, and steering flows, the steering mechanisms are going to be very weak and subject to a lot of variability, because there might be small troughs and small troughs that we can't really pick out on these wider views, or even sometimes on the you have to kind of look on the really tight views to see if there's some kind of little trough that might be that might impact the motion. But you can see what happens with Jose. Now, the overnight GFS makes a very close pass to North Carolina early next week. But let's lay aside where it takes it and just focus on the overall jet stream pattern. And when we move into the first part of next week, the main jet stream has retreated pretty far to the north. You have to go into upstate New York to find the base of the westerly winds in the jet. You have a ridge in the western Gulf. You have a bit of a ridge out in the Atlantic, and you have Jose pretty much trapped in the middle there. And it could be, anywhere in this range. It might wind up being further east. I would think that this maybe is as far west as you might see it. But again, I don't want to focus here on the literal GFS showing this close pass because the variability is going to be very large now that we're past, the third or fourth day in the model. And this run actually just kind of only brings it up so far north. And the reason it does that is because, again, the jet stream to the north is too far displaced to really just kind of pick it up and take it out. This is a bit of a change, by the way, from a couple of prior runs, which suggested that there would be something upstream in that Canadian jet to come down and grab it. And in fact, if you look, there is a trough here, okay? But the last model runs of both the GFS and the European are showing that trough to be much weaker. And if that's the case, that would be that's the mechanism that could pick this up and kick it out. It's much weaker than prior runs. I'll go back and show you. If we go back to yesterday, you can see the difference from yesterday right here. That's a much stronger shortwave that's dropping, and upper low that's dropping down into southeastern Canada. This does not exist on today's runs. on both models. You can see it picked it up, it took it up and swung it into Newfoundland yesterday. Now let's look at today's. I'm going to even jump a run. If we look at today's and go to the mid-cycle run, which is a little further east, you can barely, it shows up again, but it misses it. So, one of the keys for it to go out to sea, once it makes its initial pass, is going to be whether this shortwave that's in Canada is going to be enough to grab it and take it out to the east. So let's take a look at the Europeans' view of this. And in fact, the European, creates its own little bizarre scenario. So here we have, this is actually for today, and we have on the startup. Okay, so we've got the remnant upper low from Irma that's still, rather amorphous there and fairly strong in the upper layers of the atmosphere, although there isn't too much going on as you look on the lower layers. Here's the low that's southeast of Newfoundland that you can see on the satellite loop. Now here we have Jose. Here's the ridge that starts to build in the middle. So you got this active jet that's running across Canada. So when we move through the Europeans run, you can see as we get into Friday, this is for actually Friday evening. So we have the remnant trough now up in the northeast. Jose, here's the upper ridge. Jose is kind of trapped inside it at the moment. The main jet stream in Canada is way to the north. So at least at this point, Jose has not made its full turn until we get into Sunday. And that's where it splits the ridge. And the European, by the way, even though it does have a weak trough, it does kind of have it extended a little further to the south than GFS has it. So it looks like it wants to, at least initially, cause Jose to respond by turning a little further to the east, a little faster. But here we've got that main jet up to the north. And when we go forward, there's the Europeans' view. But the European does this weird thing here where it kind of gets captured there by some sort of little upper low that forms. You can barely find it. It's very weak, but it's one of these weak troughs that could play a role in this. Since it is separated from the main jet here at this point as we move into Monday, it does this loop. And notice, by the way, as far as the Canadian system, it's much weaker than what the GFS, even what the GFS has. So it bypasses that completely. You have a big upper ridge in general up in the eastern part of the United States, and then the European just kind of loops it back. The thing is that this is not. This is not an unreasonable long-range idea when you have this type of setup in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Now, I didn't look at the Canadian yet, so we're going to look at it together. And we'll see the Canadians' view of this. Same idea, splits the ridge, kind of gets caught in this upper low, and it really does the same, same idea that the European has, except it just executes it faster. And then the Canadian suggests that this shortwave, this would get far enough north that eventually this shortwave would get kicked out. But you know what? That's so far out into next week. I'm not even, interested in it at this particular stage. So that pretty well explains how the upper air is working with this. So just stand by for a moment here, and we will come back and we'll look at some more maps and take a look at maybe the new NAM. We'll take a look at the new NAM and see what that has to say. So just I'm here, so just hang on. I'm here, so just hang on. Okay, so why don't we look at the new NAM, which is out, and we will set this in motion for you. First of all, if I want to just bring in a tighter range view rather than the full U.S., we'll look at the eastern U.S. And, starting with Tuesday, Thursday, so that is tonight at 9 p.m. We'll go from the beginning. So this begins at actually from 10 a.m. this morning. So you can watch the NAM with this. Just kind of starts looping it around toward the west and then the northwest, and then toward the end it starts to move north or a little east of north when we are at Saturday evening. From here, all sorts of possibilities could emerge depending on that upper air that we talked about. And when we show you the upper air on the NAM, you can see this sort of crazy shaped thing that you see in between South Carolina and Bermuda is what is Jose. You can see there's a very, very weak trough. You follow the line that's shown across North Carolina, then moves out offshore. There's a very, very weak trough there, whatever that remnant trough of Irma that's weakening. And then you've got the main jet running from Iowa on up to Lake Superior into southeastern Canada and into Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. So there's a big upper ridge that's kind of building over the top of the weak trough that's sitting down along Virginia into North Carolina. This makes things really, really difficult to figure out. The number of storms that have looped in this position has not been many. One of them was Hermine last year, and if you go back and look at what Hermine did, it kind of came out off North Carolina and wound up tracking almost 150, 200 miles further east than what the models were showing, and then orchestrated a loop back toward the New Jersey coast and then went around and out. And that loop took several days to play out. But as that loop occurred, it had moved over colder water, and the system just weakened, and really didn't do very much other than clouds and parts of eastern Long Island, just from east of me, had some winds to 40 or 50 knots for a few hours, but that was about it. So a lot of times when you get these systems, when you look at the history of systems that have looped up here, they have not produced serious consequences. That's not to say that there isn't a first time, and we only have really a handful of storms that have done that. So, we want to pay attention to history, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to repeat. It might rhyme, but it may not repeat. And, you could have some sort of odd circumstance that you wind up with a different outcome. So I think, the bottom line through all of this, folks, is that this is going to be a really convoluted, complicated forecast adventure that we're going to be going on. And we're going to be on it for a while. So just beware of that. In the meantime, we certainly can say that Jose is no threat to any land right now, being halfway between the Bahamas and Bermuda. We are also could say that, certainly going into and through the weekend, unless we get some sort of surprise, that it's not going to be a threat to any land areas through that time frame. After that, we go into the who knows category. The one thing that is missing here in the upper air is because we're going to have a ridge in the east rather than a trough. You are not going to get something that's just going to accelerate up the coast. You need a deep trough to your west in order for that to happen. This thing is going to be moving very methodically and relatively slowly as it plays out. And the other the one consequence we do know is the fact that the ocean here and up and down the eastern seaboard has been roughed up for a few days, and it's likely to be roughed up for a few more. And one other thing I should mention too is the fact that we don't, because of the structural change that Jose has undergone from going from a Category 4 down to a Category 1, we're not exactly sure what we're going to be dealing with here. And it's conceivable that it could deteriorate a little bit more and weaken into a tropical storm as it starts to make its track toward the west. It's going to be traveling over water that it has already traveled on, and that water has been upwelled and cooled a bit. So that might at least, even if conditions weren't hostile, it would probably, may limit strengthening. And, there's a little bit of shear going on. We're going to have to see if that shear is forecast to relax. But, we're not 100% sure what we're dealing with. It certainly appears like what we are not dealing with is another Category 3 or 4 hurricane at this point. I think that's pretty safe to say that we're not going to have, something along those lines. The GFS seems very aggressive with the pressures on it, and I'm just going to kind of scale that back a bit. It might, on the other hand, hold its own as a minimal hurricane, and we've been in a year with these upside surprises. Intensity is the most difficult thing to forecast. It has a lot of volatility in it. It's the part of the forecast that the Hurricane Center admits itself that it has a really tough time with. There are too many factors in play. Some they can see and some that they can't. Some they understand and some they don't. Those eyewall replacement cycles, when we see these hurricanes go through them, it's impossible to figure out when they're going to start and when they're going to finish. And while they're undergoing that cycle, you can be in an overall strengthening trend, and then the strengthening just kind of stops, maybe even weakens a little bit while the eyewall is being replaced, and then it starts strengthening a second time, and you just don't know when those waves of strengthening are going to occur. So we can at least enjoy the fact that the weather here in the Northeast is pretty nice. And I can give you the satellite view to prove it. As we look, you still have that kind of triad here with the remnant low from Irma spinning away, and it's mostly low clouds. By the way, you're not seeing big buildups of downpours and thunderstorms with this. There are a few, but there's really the system has really weakened quite a bit. The upper air reflection is perhaps a bit more impressive than reality. You see Jose in the middle here, still kind of doing its move to the south, and you've got this storm that's sitting southeast of Newfoundland. This is a non-tropical storm that is slowly moving to the northeast, and in between all that, we've got this dry air and high pressure that is keeping things pretty nice. We do have some high clouds sweeping up from the south, but overall, the weather is not that unreasonable, even where it is raining today. And let's check out the radar structure here on Irma as we look at the U.S. radar, and you can see there's basically a little stick of showers that runs across east central Mississippi, northwest Alabama, eastern Tennessee, and then kind of loops around. This is just sort of that's it. There really isn't much to it. And a couple of bands up to the northwest, up near Chicago, swinging back to western Illinois. The west is fine. Florida is looking good. The northeast looking good. Looks like some little shower activity aloft that's coming up from Delaware Bay into southeastern Pennsylvania. It's hard for me to see whether there are any echoes in there. So let me see if I can I interact on this? Yep, sure can. So you can see there actually are some showers, a couple of downpours in Delaware Bay heading into southern New Jersey and parts of southeastern Pennsylvania, and those are moving up toward the north. So that's it as far as the action with regards to what Irma is showing. And let me come back here real fast. So let's leave it here at let's leave it here, and I'm going to. I have a couple of posts up that get into this a little deeper on meteorologistjoecioffi.com, so you may want to check those out. And rest assured that I'll probably do a video tonight at midnight. So tune in then when I get back home. We'll do an update on what the day run models have done and what the night model, the evening GFS usually is, coming out while we are live streaming at night at midnight. So we'll be pulling up maps to see what the overnight model run has to say. So be sure to tune in. I'll schedule the time up on the YouTube channel, so that I'll be here. And other than that, I want everybody to enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and we will see you tonight.